Gemara everybody. It's good to see you all. Thank you all for coming. My name is Zev Prince. I teach Gemara and Halacha here at Mayinot, amongst other things, and it's a pleasure to have you. Thank you for coming to the Yom Yun. It seems to be a very nice turnout for a fast day. I know that there are probably more enticing things to do on a fast day, like staying at home and taking it easy, but we do appreciate you coming, and it means a lot to all of us in the faculty. Last year, as I was preparing for the first Tekiyah Shofar, I did what all of you did yesterday and 2 days ago in Shul, which was I said Lametzeach L'Bnei Korach prior to the Tekiyah Shofar. And for the first time, I guess, and it's unfortunate that I waited this long in my life, but for the first time I noticed that we invoke the names of the Bnei Korach before the recitation of the Tekiyah Shofar. I'm sure all of you have thought about this before and have come up with some answers in terms of why. But for some reason, I had never occurred to me, or I never thought to ask the question, why is it that at the pinnacle of the Rosh Hashanah davening, which is the Yom Hadin, which is right before the Tekiyah Shofar, which perhaps is the highlight of the entire year, if we're going to talk about ritualistic acts that we do during the year, Shofar is probably at the top of our list. Why is it that we invoke the names of the Bnei Korach, the sons of Korach, the Rosh HaKorach, literally seconds before we recite the Shofar? Not only do we invoke their names once, but as we know, we say Lametzeach L'Bnei Korach a total of 7 times. And the question is why? Why did they deserve such an exalted part in our liturgy? And as far as I know, I don't know if it's universal, but it's fairly close to universal, that we all recite the same Kapitel of Tehillim. And the question is why? So I decided last year, Rosh Hashanah time, that I was going to, for this year's topic, if I was going to speak at the Yom Yun again, if I was hired back by Mayinot, and thank God in the interim I was, I decided that if I was going to give a shir this year, I would give a shir on the Bnei Korach. And I expected that there would be a whole lot of literature out there on the Bnei Korach. I was somewhat surprised that there isn't. And I did not find them much in the Bnei Korach, because we're going to see Chazal do talk about them, but there is not much extensively written about them. There are very few Gemaras about them. There's one Gemara or 2 Gemaras in the same parak that talk about them. But I want to explore who were the Bnei Korach, what is the significance of the Bnei Korach, and then of course, last but not least, why do they deserve a spot on Rosh Hashanah right before Tekiyah Shofar? So first, a little bit of parsha, a little bit understanding of the Psukim and where the Bnei Korach are not mentioned. So we know, or we're told, that there are people in Tanakh who did not die. Serach, Bas Asher, the Gemara in Tana says that Yaakov Avinu lo meis. But the Torah itself doesn't say that any of these people achieved immorality. Right? There are allusions to it, the Gemara tells us, based on the readings of the Psukim. But there is one group of people that the Torah does tell us lo meis, and that is the Bnei Korach. And you would expect, where would the Torah tell us that the Bnei Korach died? Where would the Torah tell us that Bnei Korach did not die along with their father? You would expect it to be in Parshas Korach. But the Torah doesn't say that. The Torah says, Ubnei Korach lo meisu, but it doesn't say it in Parshas Korach. As a matter of fact, the Torah says it a few parshios later in Parshas Pinchas. So the first question we're going to ask is, if you look at the Psukim, let's take a look at the Psukim we have in front of us. This is Bamidbar, Parshas Pinchas, Perek Chavav, and Bamidbar. I'm going to read it myself just so you can get everyone out of here quicker, if that's okay. Unless you want to read the sources. Anyone anxious to read the sources? No? So we'll just try to go through the sources. We'll try to go through them thoroughly, but we won't spend too much time on the sources. So the Torah in Parshas Pinchas is recounting in the census all the Shvatim. And in the recount of Shevet Reuven, it tells us in Pasuk Tes, Ubnei Eliyav, Nemuel, V'dasan, V'aviram, Hudasan, V'aviram, Kuruei Ha'eda, who were Dasan and Aviram, who were from Shevet Reuven, Asher Hutzu El Moshe Be'el Aaron Ba'adas Korach Patzosam Al Adonai. They were the same Dasan and Aviram that rebelled against Moshe and Aaron when they were part of the Adas of Korach. And then the Torah tells us what happened to them. Why aren't they included in the census? Why aren't their numbers being counted? So it tells in the pasuk, "Vatiftach ha'aretz es pia," and the earth opened up its mouth. Vativla otam, and they were swallowed up. Vet Korach b'mos ha'edza be'achol ha'ish es ha'chamishim u'masayim ish b'yulanis. They were swallowed up along with Korach and the 250 men. That's the end of Dasan v'Aviram. And then almost seemingly on a tangent, the Torah tells us, in the next pasuk, one very short pasuk, this is the entire pasuk, I didn't clip it, Ubnei Korach lo mesu. But the sons of Korach themselves did not die. So, we have a few questions so far. Question number 1 is, why mention it over here in Parshas Pinchas? It would seem to have been more relevant to have mentioned Ubnei Korach lo mesu at the moment when Mitzvah ha'aretz osam, when the earth swallowed them up in Parshas Korach itself. Right, that would have been the point, to mention that Korach's sons didn't die. Second question, who were Bnei Korach? What Shevet were they from? They were from Levi, right? Korach's whole argument and rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron was, we're all from Bnei Levi. How come you deserve to be Kohanim? How come I can't be a Kohen? I'm also a descendant, a grandson of Levi. But they're not mentioned in the census of Bnei Levi. You would think that when the Torah was going through the Shevet Levi, the Torah would mention who were some of the better known names in Shevet Levi, who were some of the who's who in Shevet Levi, and it would mention Bnei Korach Lo Mesu. But it doesn't mention it. It mentions it as a side point, almost as an afterthought and as a tangent to the fact that Dasan and Aviram died, and they died with the Adas of Korach. So that's question number 2. Question number 3 is, there seems to be perhaps a stira between the psukim. If you look at Bamidbar Perach Tet Zayin, this is now Parshas Korach. The Torah tells us that it goes through the argument and the rebellion by Korach and his followers, and then Pasuk Lamed Aleph, I have underlined, it says, "Vayiki chalasol daber," it's called Me'ila Bativika Adama Asher Tachtim. After Moshe finished speaking, the earth opened up and it swallowed everyone. And who did it swallow? Vativtach haaretz espia, vativla osam bet bateim. It swallowed them and their houses and their families. Ves kol ha'adam asher leKorach ves harachush. Everybody who was to Korach and their possessions. Heim v'chol asher lahem. Had I read this pasuk or these psukim before I read Parshas Pinchas, which is what we do because it comes chronologically before Parshas Pinchas, I would assume that when the Torah tells me that's kol ha'adam asher leKorach, who is Etz kol ha'adam asher leKorach, I would assume it meant Korach's family itself. And if it didn't mean Korach's family itself, so this would be the place to tell me that's kol ha'rachush chutz mibnei Korach ubnei Korach lo mesu. So a third question is, the Torah, this not only should the Torah have mentioned it in Parshas Korach that they didn't die, but if the Torah is going to tell me that everything that belonged to Korach and his entire household died, now is the time to speak up and tell me, but wait, so not so fast. There were some tzaddikim. If they were tzaddikim, we'll see. And their names were the Bnei Korach, and they didn't die. So question number 3 is, why doesn't it say it here? And it seems to be a stira, it seems to be a contradiction within the psukim themselves. Okay, so did they die or did they not die? That's also part of the same question. And the fourth question I want to ask is that the Torah says, Ubnei Korach lo mesu. Again, it's not that it's incorrect to phrase it this way, but the Torah could have simply said as a positive statement, Ubnei Korach chayu, and the Korach's descendants lived. Why does it say Ubnei Korach lo mesu? So I want to go through a few of these questions right now. Some of them we'll leave to the end. And I think the question is still strong questions, but I want to go through some of the answers that are out there to answer these questions. So the third question we asked it first. I wrote down as my third question. The first question we asked was, why are they mentioned along with Shevet Reuven when in fact they were from Shevet Levi? So the Ibn Ezra, which is the fourth source on your sheet, as well as the Orach Chaim and others mention, that the truth of the matter is that although we like to think that Korach was the ringleader of his rebellion, it was called after his name, and the truth of the matter is the ringleaders of the rebellion of Korach were really Dasan v'Aviram. And the Ibn Ezra points out that that's why the Torah mentions, when mentioning Shevet Reuven, that's why it mentions Bnei Korach lo mesu. Because in reality, and the Orach Chaim says this as well, and the Ibn Ezra says it says that Dasan and Aviram were really the ones who were responsible for the entire revolt. Because of Dasan and Aviram, both young and old died. Because of them, children died, says Ibn Ezra. The implication being, in this Orach Chaim says this clearly, the end of the Ibn Ezra. It was Dasan and Aviram's wickedness that was even worse than the wickedness of Korach himself. So where does the Torah telling us this? It chooses within the Shevet of Reuven, when mentioning Dasan and Aviram, to go back and mention the rebellion of Korach. Why? To let us know that they were the ones who were chiefly responsible, says the Orach Chaim. They were the ones who were chiefly responsible for the entire revolt in the first place. And how about the contradiction within the psukim, or the seeming contradiction, did they die or did they not die? So the truth of the matter is, it's not so clear what happened to the Bnei Korach. If you look at Rashi points out, this is the second source on the sheet, Rashi in Pinchas, where it mentions the Bnei Korach lo mesu. Rashi is the Bnei Korach lo mesu. So Rashi says, Heim hayu be'etza tchila. Originally, they were amongst those who were in the Eitzas Korach. They were advisors to Korach. They were people who were taken in with the arguments of Korach. Uveshas hamachlokas, but in the middle of the machlokas, hirharu tshuva belibam, they did tshuva in their hearts. They felt bad, they felt ashamed for what they had done in rebellion against Moshe Rabbeinu and Aaron. Lefichach nitbatzer lehem makam gavoa begehenim. Hashem gave them a ledge, a high ledge in Gehenim to stand on. V'yashvu sham, and they stood there. So according to Rashi, it's not a stira. When the Torah tells us in Korach that everything perished, it included Bnei Korach. They were swallowed up in the earth as well. But then when the Torah tells us in Pinchas Bnei Korach lo mesu, so then it's telling the truth also, because they didn't die, they stood on a ledge in Gehenna. So in reality there is a contradiction in the Psukim. And Rashi is bavorning, he's understanding the contradiction, and he anticipates it, and therefore he quotes, and we'll see this is a Medrash and this is a Gemara, that they were swallowed up, but yet they didn't die. They were a little bit in each category. They were those who were swallowed, but those who remained alive. Okay. So it was their tshuva that saved them, apparently. The question is, why does it wait until here, until Parshas Pinchas, to mention that they were saved and not Parshas Korach? So I think we could use the same answer to answer that question. They deserve to die. And therefore, when the Torah tells us in Parshas Korach, when it tells us Ve'eskol ha'adam asher lekorach ve'eskol ha'rechush and pasuk lamed beis, it meant them as well. And the Torah didn't want to give any caveats or any exceptions. It wanted to say that everyone that belonged to Korach died, and the Bnei Korach deserved to die. Without exception, they were amongst the rechush ve'eskol ha'adam. And therefore the Torah does not mention it in Parshas Korach. Why? Because it would be showing deference to them. But they deserve to die. But the Torah's got to be emistic. The Torah can't leave the fact that there are 3 members of Klal Yisrael out from the census. So beautifully we can answer that it includes them therefore when talking about the census. Why? Because therefore it can tell us, the Torah could teach us that they deserve to die and they were swallowed up. Yet when going through the counts in Bnei Yisrael, it mentions them because they were included as well. So now we understand why they were with Dasan and Viram, because it's to show Ganai Dasan and Viram, but they were responsible for it. Now we understand why there seems to be a stira in the Psukim, because there really is a stira. They were swallowed, but they didn't die. And now we understand why it was mentioned later on, because they deserved to die, and the Torah is not going to show any deference to them in Parshas Korach. They were amongst those that were swallowed up. But when it comes to the census, the Torah has to be emistic. It has to tell us who was and who was not included in the census. But I want to focus now on the tshuva of the Bnei Korach. Was this... I turned my notes. I didn't turn the sheet yet. Was this the paradigm for real tshuva or not? Should we learn from Bnei Korach how one can affect positive tshuva or not? And I want to ask a number of questions, both on some of the sources we've seen so far, but also on Bnei Korach themselves. If you look back at Rashi, this will be our first question. Rashi tells us in the beginning, it says that when did they do tshuva? I underlined it. Heim hayu be'etza tchila uveshas hamachlokas hirharu b'tshuva. And at the time of the machlokas, they did tshuva in their hearts. Well, let me ask you a question. If the Bnei Korach did tshuva at the moment of the machlokas, then why were they, as Rashi points out, swallowed up by the ground at all? If they did tshuva once they were already being swallowed up and they were literally falling into the earth, and their necks were, and there was up to their necks, and they were about to be swallowed up, and then they cried out to Hashem. So I understand. But they didn't do tshuva when they were about to die. The Rashi points out, he says, B'shas ha-machlokas hirharu b'tshuva. They did tshuva while the machlokas was going on. And if they did machlokas b'shas ma'isa, when the Aveira was taking place, so why were they swallowed up at all? What are we to make of them? Why do they deserve to be swallowed up if they did tshuva? Number 2, how did they do tshuva? So again, that same underlined phrase in Rashi, hirharu tshuva b'libam, they did tshuva in their hearts. Does that sound like a geshmaka tshuva? Does that sound like a really strong tshuva? Rashi says, hirharu b'libam, they did tshuva in their hearts. Right? Where's the aziva sachet? Right? Rambam tells us, in the Rambam in his Hilchos Tshuva tells us that a person has to have charata ala avar. They have to feel bad about what they did. They have to have a ziva sachet. They have to promise not to do this sin in the future. They have to do vidoy b'dvarim as well as vidoy b'leiv. They have to say and enumerate their sins. Right? Unless it's been adam l'chaveira, but it wasn't just been adam l'chaveira. Here it's been adam l'makom. They're rebelled against Hashem. And there's none of that. Here, Hara b'tshuva. So number 2 is, what kind of tshuva is this? The fact that Rashi mentions it means that it's significant. Here, Hara b'tshuva b'libam. They thought tshuva, but they didn't do tshuva. So what kind of tshuva is this that the Torah says they're deserving of being saved? Why did they do tshuva? Do we know why they did tshuva? We don't know why they did tshuva. All we know is, as Rashi points out, they were originally in the Eitzah, they were originally in the inner circle of Korach, and then they did tshuva. We don't know why they did tshuva. The Torah doesn't tell us why they did tshuva. So question number 3 is, why did they do tshuva? And the third question is, and this is a really fascinating question, it's actually a machlokas, where were they? Did they ever leave Gehenna or not? Did the Bnei Korach ever get out of Gehenna? Look at Rashi. What does it imply from Rashi? I underline the last 2 words. Vayashvu sham, and they sat there. So did they ever leave Gehenna? Or did they end up remaining in Gehenna for the rest of eternity? Because Rashi certainly doesn't say, it just says Vayashvu sham. So the question is, when? Right? When did they do tshuva? How did they do tshuva? Why did they do tshuva? And where? Right? All the important questions. And where were they when they did tshuva? Did they stay in Gehenna or not? I think when we answer all these questions about the Bnei Korach, we'll have some insight into tshuva that is both relevant and timely, when we understand a little bit more about the Bnei Korach themselves. But first, before we get there, Rashi tells us in the bottom of the page, this is the first Rashi in all of Sefer Tehillim. Rashi tells us that 10 people, aside from David HaMelech himself, contributed to Sefer Tehillim. And amongst them were the Bnei Korach, right? Keneged Asara Bnei Adam Shamruhu, there are 10 forms of praise used in Tehillim, corresponding to 10 people who wrote Sefer Tehillim, who contributed to Sefer Tehillim. Right? Avram, Moshe, David, Shlomo, Asaf, Ushlosha Bnei Korach, and the 3 sons of Korach. Not only that, we referenced before Lam Netzeach Levnei Korach that we say before Hashanah, but there are actually 12 kapitlach of Tehillim that are attributed to the Bnei Korach themselves, that they themselves said. Right? But the question is, listen to this. Lam Netzeach Levnei Korach, Lam Netzeach Ala Shoshanim Levnei Korach, Shir Mizmor Levnei Korach. When you hear Levnei Korach, who do you think of? I think of Korach. Yes, they were his sons. But why does Korach deserve to be mentioned in Sefer Tehillim? Why are 12 kapitlach Tehillim attributed to him? They're not attributed to his sons. Who are his sons' names? Asir, Elkanah, Eviasaph. It's not Lam Netzeach, Leviasaph, Asir, Elkanah. It's Lam Netzeach, Levnei Korach. You would think that if these children of Korach really did a true tshuva, we'd want to eradicate his name from Sefer Tehillim. We want to eradicate his name from the Torah, except when mentioning the Adas Korach, the rebellion of Korach. Why do we pay tribute to Korach himself? We can easily have separated the Bnei Korach from Korach himself by mentioning their names and not his name. So the 5th question is, why do we give continuity to the name of Korach? Why do we keep on invoking it again and again and again and again? The Bnei Korach. They're referred to, no one knows. Who are the Bnei Korach? Eviasaph, Asir, Elkanah. Right? We're less familiar with their names than Korach's names. So why? How come their names are rarely mentioned? I mean, they're mentioned in Tanakh, but they're rarely mentioned. What's the reason for that? That's the 5th question we're going to ask. And the truth of the matter is that you could ask this question on Tehillim, but you could ask this question on the Torah as well. And the Ramban does ask this question. He says, we know that Korach, next page, we know that Korach was Ben Yitzhar. So if we really wanted to get rid of the name Korach once and for all, we should have, when we did the census and we referred to the families in Shevet Levi, we should have referred to him as Mishpachas HaYitzhari, the family of Yitzhar. Why did we choose instead to mention it as the family of Korach? It would have made sense. He also had a father, didn't he? And then for all of his descendants, whoever remained alive, his 3 sons, were not just descendants of Korach, but they were also descendants of Yitzhar. So if you really wanted to get rid of the name Korach from the Torah and stop giving tribute to this Rasha, we could have easily called Mishpachas HaYitzhari. But the Torah doesn't. It refers to them, after the rebellion of Korach, refers to them as Mishpachas HaKarchi. And the Ramban tells us, so first the Ramban gives a practical answer. And he tells us the reason is because all of Yitzhar's descendants died out. And therefore the only ones who were left were the descendants of Korach. Okay, fine. Although we could argue that his descendants are also the descendants of Yitzhar. And then he tells us another answer. Ulefi da'ati, lo hayam, this is now the Ramban on the top of the second sheet. Ulefi da'ati, where it's underlined. Lo hayam min harayu she'akor shem hayitzari mizaro afal pi shemesu katsas banov. I don't think it would have been enough to get rid of the name Yitzhar from the Torah, just because his children died out. But there's another reason why Mishpachas HaKarchi is mentioned. Aval asu zeh acharei masa Korach. Dafka in Parshas Pinchas, the Torah wants to revitalize and wants to bring honor to the name Korach. Ba'avur kavod banav, in order to give honor to their children, lahodia b'Yisrael ledoros, in order to make known for all future generations in the Jewish people, Shemam b'zichram, that their names should be mentioned and shall be recalled. Kikein hakasu mishtadol lomar b'nei Korach lamasi, since the Torah found it necessary for us to know that Korach's sons didn't die, so therefore it's important for us to know they didn't die. And why didn't they die? Says Hodia ki kein hayu banav tzadikim v'tovim imenu, because Korach's sons got it right where their father got it wrong. They were better than him. And I'm not going to go through, but the next medrash says the same thing. But again, we could ask the same question. You can still give credit to them without calling their father's name. If you want to distinguish between them and their father, so leave his name out. And all the Mefarshim will come and say, well, you know why they're called the B'nai Abiasaf, B'nai Elkanah, and the B'nai Asir? You have to look at that. I don't know their names. Their names are not that. Right? We don't talk about them that often. You know why they're not called the B'nai Asir, the B'nai Elkanah, and the B'nai Abiasaf? Because their father was a Rasha. And that's why we leave his name out of the Tanakh. And we could have had the same discussion. So if you really want to show distinction, leave his name and include their name in Tanakh. So we have all these questions. When did they do Chuva? Where were they? Why did they do Chuva? And why is the name Korach's name mentioned again and again and again and again? And why is his name mentioned before Tekiyah Shofar and Rosh Hashanah? Because that really, right? That really should not be the place where his name should be mentioned. That should bother all of us. So, how sincere was their Chuva? And why do they deserve to have children in their name? So the Yalkut Shimoni tells us as follows. The Yalkut Shimoni now, it's the third source on the next sheet. It says as follows. It gives us the story. The Torah tells us that 4 people were saved by Moshe Rabbeinu. One of them was Owen ben Peles. Right, we know that his wife saved him from Gehenna by not allowing her husband to be taken at the moment of the rebellion. And as well as the 3 sons of Korach, they were also saved from Gehenna. And the Medrash wants to know Yalkut Shimoni. Why did they deserve to be saved? Because when they were sitting in the council of their father Korach, they saw Moshe's face. And they buried their face in the ground. Why did they bury their face in the ground in front of Moshe Rabbeinu? Right? Amram. Na'amod b'pnei Moshe Rabbeinu. Nohagim b'zayim ba'avinu. If we stand up for Moshe Rabbeinu, we're disgracing our father, because our father is the one who's arguing with Moshe Rabbeinu. Ukvar nitztavinu al kibbut avim. And at this point, the Torah had already been given. There's already a mitzvah of kibbut avim. So they can't stand up for Moshe Rabbeinu, because if they stand for Moshe Rabbeinu, it's a shtach to their father. It's an insult to their father. V'im lo na'amod. If they don't stand up for Moshe Rabbeinu, kvar ksiv, the Torah already says, m'pnei seibatakim, get up for a scholar, get up for a Talmid Chacham. Mutav shna'amod b'fnei Moshe Rabbeinu. So they decided it's better that we stand up for Moshe Rabbeinu, afal pish ananogim bizayim b'avinu, even though we're doing a bizayon for our father. Their heart murmured with tshuva. We'll see that pasuk in a little bit. My heart murmured for a good matter, a good thing. So the Medrash says they were conflicted. They didn't know if Moshe Rabbeinu was right. You know, he was a Talmid Chacham. But Abba's also right. So we have to bury our face in the ground. It reminded me when I was learning, if you look in the beginning of the Beis Yosef, in Hilchos Talmud Torah, in Hilchos Kavod Rabo, when it goes through the laws of Talmud Torah and the respect one has to give to their teacher, so the Beis Yosef there mentions that when the Rambam became the chief rabbi, I'm guessing it was the city of Rottenburg, when he became the chief rabbi, he says he rarely ever saw his father again. The Beis Yosef, I didn't look it up, but as I seem to recall, this is how the story goes. And the question is, why didn't he ever really see his father? Because he was also conflicted. He was the chief rabbi. And if his father were to come in, this is the Maamar Rambam, if his father were to come into the room, it would be a bizayon to the people who elected him the chief rabbi to stand up for his father. But his father came into the room, he was kibbut avim, so he can't stand up for his father. So he was conflicted. What do? I have the honor of the people on the one hand, I have the mitzvah midiraisa of kibbut avim on the other hand. So he rarely saw his father in order to avoid conflict. I mean, that's a madrega. But that reminded me of the Bnei Korach, right? They didn't know what to do, so they buried their head in the ground. So that's what the Medrash tells us. It hardly sounds, though, if you look at the Medrash, the Yalkut Shimoni, as if their tshuva was so sincere. It doesn't say that they were Moshe emes v'Taraso emes, that they were so convinced that Moshe was right, and they felt so hard that they were heartbroken. Their heart murmured. Rachash belibam. Their heart murmured. This is not right. We should stand up for Moshe. You know, what we're really doing is really not the way a Ben Torah behaves. It doesn't sound like such a sincere tshuva. I mean, unless you disagree, I would think it's not so compelling. Yeah, I did tshuva, but what kind of tshuva was it really? At least the way the Medrash explains it to us. And it seems similar to what Rashi told us. Here, Haru b'tshuva belibam, Rashi told us, they thought tshuva in their hearts. Here it says the same thing. Here, chishu was libam b'tshuva. Their hearts murmured b'tshuva. They didn't declare that Moshe was right. They didn't revolt against their father. They were quiet about it. They were very passive about it. So where this Medrash is really made well known, and an idea similar to this Medrash is actually the Gemara in Misaka Sanhedrin. The Gemara in Misaka Sanhedrin says the follows. The Gemara says as follows. It says, Ubnei Korach lo mesu. And Korach's sons did not die, says the Gemara. Where are we here? We're right towards the bottom of the sheet. Talabali, Misaka Sanhedrin, Kuf Yudam and Aleph, and it continues on Kuf Yudam and Beis. Ubnei Korach lo mesu. Tana Meshum Rabbeinu Amar. We were taught in the name of Yehuda Hanasi. Makom nitbatzer lehem begehenim. A place was set aside from them in Gehenim. V'yashvu alav v'amru shira. And they sat there and they said shira. Okay? So, look at Rashi on the Gemara. The Gemara says, what is makom nitbatzer? A place was set aside for them in Gehenim. Rashi says, Hiskin lahan HaKadosh Baruch Hu makom gavoha. Hashem set them up a high place in Gehenim. So hamiku kol kach beGehenim. So they weren't so far down in Gehenim, below Mesu, and they wouldn't die. Again, just like Rashi al Torah, the Gemara seems to be saying to us that they were in Gehenim. They weren't in the depths of Gehenim. Nisbatzer lehem. There was a ledge overlooking Gehenim, but they stayed in Gehenim. They didn't go all the way down into Gehenim, but they stayed in Gehenim. And the truth of the matter is, says Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi, who is a super commentary on Rashi, and says the Gur Aryeh that we'll see in a second. Because Rashi says Vayashvu Sham, even though the Gemara doesn't say it, it says Vayashvu Alav, and they sat up. Rashi says Vayashvu Sham. As you saw Rashi al Torah, the Mizrahi says we see from here they never ever left Gehenim. And as a matter of fact, the Gemara continues with the story. The Gemara tells us, Amar Rabba Bar Bar Chana, said Rabba Bar Bar Chana. And the Gemara continues, the Gemara we were just in. Zimna Chadu Habakazli B'orch. I was once walking on the road. Amarli Hayat Haya. A certain Arab merchant said to me, Tava Achvei L'cha B'luei de Korach. You want to see where Korach was swallowed up in the earth? Azil Chazah Trei Bezai. He went and he showed him there were two cracks in the ground. To have a Kanafe Kitra Minayu. And smoke was billowing out from these two cracks. Shakal Gavava Da'amra, he took a ball of wool. Amashehu B'maya, he soaked it in water. V'osfei B'reish Rumchei, and he put it on the head of his spear. V'achlefei Hasam, and he passed it over the cracks on the ground. Iachrach, even though the wool was wet and it was soaked to the core, the wool was singed. Amarli, the Arab said to me, says Rabbi Barachana, Atseisa my shemas. Listen carefully. What do you hear when you put your ear to the ground? Ushma'is tahavi ka'amri hachi. This is what I heard them say. Moshe b'toraso emes b'heim badayim. Moshe and his Torah are truthful, and they, meaning we, the Bnei Korach, we are liars. Amar le seitzim kol tlasim yomim, each every 30 days. Mahadra lu gehenim kibasar mitol kalcha. They return to Gehenim and they're stirred like meat is stew in a pot. Korach and his followers. V'amri hachi, and every 30 days they get up, they say Moshe Torah Moshe utaraso emes v'heim badayim. Moshe is truthful and his Torah is truthful, and we are liars. We're not going to go through it now. I couldn't find it on Bar Ilan, so I gave it to you a copy of it where I saw it quoted on the back sheet. The back sheet quoted from the Agados Maharit, Rabbeinu Harav Yoel Teitelbaum. That's the Samar Rav's commentary on Sanhedrin. He quotes the Rabbi Eliyahu Mizrahi. It's a machlokas Rishonim. He's of the opinion that Bnei Korach never left Gehenim. They never left Gehenim. They stayed in Gehenim. But Yashvu Sham, and they said Shira from Gehenim. Says the Gur Aryeh in the next source, the Maharal Miprad. You want to know what the Torah says? Ubnei Korach lo mesu. Bnei Korach, his sons didn't die. But it doesn't say Ubnei Korach chayu, but they lived. You know what the Gorari says? We'll look at this in the next source. What does he say? Mashma, first line, de lo mesu, they didn't die. Aval chayim nami lo havu, they didn't remain alive. They didn't walk out from Gehenna, but they didn't die. There was a place, a ledge for them in Gehenna, and they stayed on that ledge. Why? Why didn't they deserve to get out of Gehenna? Because they did Chuva, as we said, as Rashi said here, her belibam in their hearts. Rachshu Chuva belibam. They thought Chuva and murmured in their hearts, but it was not a Chuva Gemura. Chuva Gemura lo asu, says the Maharal, the Goyer. They didn't do a sincere Chuva. Ulofichach lo chayim ulo mesu. They didn't get to live. They didn't deserve to die. But it's basel hamakam gavoa b'yashram, and they're still there today. Wow, that's pretty powerful. So why did they do Chuva? Because they didn't want to show deference to Moshe or to Korach. So they said, "It matters also to Moshe." Where were they? They stayed where they were. What were other questions that we wanted to ask? When did they do Chuva? They did Chuva during the Machlokas. If they did Chuva during the Machlokas, why did they deserve to be swallowed up? Because only Chuva believe. But now we get to our final question. And the question is, if all this is emes and all this is truthful, then why invoke their names? They're still in Gehenna. There are 12 Kapitach of Tehillim attributed to them. The family of Korach is known as the Bnei... I want to point... And we have to be intellectually honest here. It's a machlokas rishonim whether they ever left Gehenna or not. The Re'im is not the only one. There's a medrash that says that Shmuel Hanavi, and we know Shmuel Hanavi comes from Mishpachas Korach. We learn that in Divrei Hayamim. But some say that they came out, and some say this medrash implies that there's no way they ever came out. Maybe they came out and went back in. But either way, it's a machlokas, but there are opinions that they never left Gehenna. And if you could say they never left Gehenna, it means there's something lacking in their tshuva. And there's something lacking in their tshuva, then why do we invoke their tshuva on Rosh Hashanah? So I want to end with something that I never noticed before until it was pointed out to me this year by a Rav in my shul, Rav Yitzchak Siegel. He talked about this, and I thought it was such a nice idea, and he showed a source that I'd never seen before. And I want to use this source to answer our final questions on the Bnei Korach and understand what we can learn from their tshuva. And I think it's like this. You know, we have a lot of allusions to people doing tshuva in Tanakh, right? We believe that people do tshuva. We believe that the first one to do tshuva was Cain did tshuva. As Chatai, was it Avoni gadol minaso? My sin is too great to bear. Okay. We believe that Yehuda did tshuva with the Ma'aseh of Tamar when he was Moda ala Emes. We believe that Moshe Rabbeinu did tshuva. But it doesn't say we give such credence to tshuva that if a person sins, they have to do tshuva. But does the Torah tell us by any of these people? Gadol avoni minaso, my sin is too great to bear, says Cain. He doesn't do tshuva. He just says, I'm breaking under the pressure of my sin. He never returns to Hashem and says, Hashem, I'm sorry. Who's the first person in Tanakh to do tshuva? What? David HaMelech. Very good, David HaMelech. And I think there's something very instructive we can learn from the tshuva of David HaMelech, and I want to use that, and I think it fits in perfectly with answering our questions on the Bnei Korach. We're not going to go through all of it now, I'm going to save you, but if you look at the very last of the computer printed sheets, if you look at the source, we know there's a story of David and Bathsheba. David and Bathsheba. And we know that Bathsheba is married to another man. She's married to Uriah Hitti. And David sees her, and he wants very much, I think it's okay, I haven't checked. And he wants very much to be with this woman. And the pasuk tells us at the end of, I think it's going. Yeah, you tell me if it's not going. Okay, good. Let's go. Baruch Hashem. And the Navi tells us in the Perek Aleph, it says, Vatihi vayasfa el beito, that David takes her in Pasach of Zion into his house. Vatihi lo liishta, vateled lo bein, she became to him a wife, and they had a child. Vayira hadavar asher asa David b'nei Adonai. And what David did was terrible in the eyes of Hashem. And Hashem decides that this cannot go unpunished, and He sends His Navi, Nasan HaNavi, al David HaMelech. Vayishlach Adonai is Nasan HaDavid, He sends Nasan HaDavid, v'olav yomer Hashem Hashem hayubiyir, and He gives him a hypothetical situation. There's two men in this city. There's one man who's an Ashir, and one man who's a Rush, a destitute person. And the Ashir, the rich man, had all the cattle in the world. Ula Rush, Ein Kol Kiyim, Kivsa, Achas, Ketana. Vatigdali Mo, he had one keves, one little lamb. And he raised the lamb like a daughter. It's heart-wrenching. Vatihilo Labas. Vayavo Helech Leisha Ashir, Vayachmo Lakachas Mitzonim, Bakarov, Lasos, Laorech, Habalo, Vayikachet Kivsas Isha Rush, Vyat Isha Ba'ilav. The wealthy man comes and he devours, he shechs, the little sheep, the little lamb that the poor man has. Vayichar Pasakeh. David hears this. Vayichar Raf David v'Ishmod, and David gets furious. Vayomer el Nasan Chai Adonai ki ben Maves Ishazos. I want this man killed, the man who did this. There's Kivsi Yishalim Arbatayim, and he has to pay him back manyfold for the lamb which he took. Vayomer Nasan el David, very famous words in Pasuk Zayin, some of the most famous words in all of Tanakh. Ato ha'ish, you are the man who did this. And David is crestfallen. And he continues, and what does David do? Look at Pasuk Yud Gimel. It says, Vayomer David el Nasan chatasi ladonai. 2 words. I have sinned to God. Then, Vayomer Nasan el David. Nasan says to David, Gam Adonai havir chatas chalomos. Hashem has removed your sin. You don't deserve to die. Didn't we just say before that the Rambam says that if you don't have charata ala avar, if you don't have a kabbalah ala asid, if you don't feel ashamed for what you did in the past, if you don't promise not to do it again in the future, if you don't do vidoy ma'asav, if you don't enumerate your sins, it's not a tshuva. And yet the first person to do tshuva in Tanakh, we'd expect something more. It comes David HaMelech, and he says, Chatasi ladonai, 2 words, and Nasan Navi says, all is forgiven. What happened to the Rambam's 10 prakim of Hilchos Tshuva? That's the best. David HaMelech, who wrote Tehillim, yes, I understand Tehillim, he goes through it and he writes about the mistakes he made. But this is the best David HaMelech can muster up. Chatasi ladonai, I sin to Hashem. That's the best he can do when the Navi says your tshuva has been accepted. So I want to show you an unbelievable idea that I never heard before. If you notice here, there's a little samach after that. That's because in the Bar Ilan they don't want to waste space. But that samach implies that there is a space. The pasuk is satum, it ends over there, and there is a space in the middle of a pasuk. And the space continues, Vayomer Nasan al David, that you have been forgiven. What goes on in that space? There is empty space. Look in the Tanakh. There's empty space in the Tanakh. I want to share with you something unbelievable. If you look at the last page, this is from Rav Shmuel Malshin. That's how I heard it pronounced. And in his Sefer, Barak HaShachar, he's a Talmud of the Vilna Gaon, of the Gra, the Vilna Gaon. And he asks this question. He says, why did David HaMelech deserve to be forgiven? And it says as follows. Shemati bishmo amasha kasar shmuel beis yid beis vayomer David chatasi vayomer love nasan gam Hashem aver chatas chelai. V'hinei, second line, the second paragraph, second line. V'hinei achar tevas chatasi, after the word chatasi, yesham piska be'emtza pasuk. There is a pause in the middle of the pasuk. V'hataham hu ki lechora kasha al David shlo amar kol seder havidoy shu chatasi avisi pashati. And perhaps the reason is because it was so difficult for David, he couldn't even muster the words Chatasi, Avisi, Pashati. He was so crestfallen about what he had done. Ulam ha'inyan hu k'moshe kasav ha'over avera echad konalo kategor echad. Uva amiras havidoy belev nishbar batal korach hamakatrek. When a person does an avera, there's a prosecuting angel which is created. But if you break your heart, and you feel so ashamed that you can't even get the words out, and your heart is broken to the point where you're so ashamed that you can't even speak, Batel koach hamakatrig, the entire sin is washed away. V'hinei David HaMelech aver sholem amar havidoy belev nishbar. He said vidoy with a broken heart. Kol kach, it was such a broken heart. Achetevas chatasi lavad kavar kala koach hamakatrig. The word chatasi enough alone destroyed the malach. Valkein hifsiku Nasan Hanavi be'emsa vidoy. Nasan Hanavi said, David HaMelech, stop. You said enough. You've said too much. Chatasi la Hashem. You had me at Chatasi la Hashem. Because you did it with a leiv nishbar. Vahavidoy, etc., etc. So we see from Rav Shmuel Malchin, who quotes the Vilna Gaon, that if you do it with belev nishbar, if you do it with a broken heart, if your tshuva is not a tshuva because I feel bad about the sin and what it did to me, but your first inclination is chatasi la Hashem, then your tshuva works. And let's now go back to what the Rashi quotes about the Bnei Korach. Let's go back to what we see about the Bnei Korach. What did Bnei Korach do after they were nispaser lahem makum begehenim? The Gemara tells us, vayashvu alav vayomru shira. They didn't say, woe is me. They didn't say, we feel bad for Moshe Rabbeinu. Va'amru shira la Hashem. They said, shira to Hashem, believe nishbar. And I found, and I thought it was unbelievable, because if you look at the pasuk the Yalkut Shimoni quotes, and it couldn't be more perfect, and I was so pleased when I saw this. If you look at the pasuk the Yalkut Shimoni quotes, the Yalkut Shimoni says, when David HaMelech wrote Kapitla Tilim in their name, when did he have their tshuva in mind? Look back at the Yalkut Shimoni, page 2, at the first underlined section. It says, Ba'osa Shah, at that moment, Hirchishu et libam b'tshuva. They did tshuva in their hearts. Alehem Amar David, and David in Kapitel Memhei 45 says, Libi Rachash Libi Davar Tov. My heart murmurs with a good thought. What do you mean my heart murmurs? That's the best? Rachash Libi Davar Tov? David, the man of all eloquence, he says, Davar Tov, a good matter. My heart murmurs the good matter. He couldn't say anything better about their tshuva when he talks about Bnei Korach. Rachash Libi Davar Tov. I want you to look at the Radak, right before the Pesukim and Shmuel on page 3. Commenting on the words, Rachash Libi Davar Tov. Rechushe Marchashan B'sifsoseha. When your heart is broken and your heart murmurs, it's like the murmuring of the lips. What does it mean that David says, Rachash Libi Davar Tov? Shayamaniya Sifsosav, their lips could not utter tshuva. They were so broken in what they did that their lips were mumbling. They couldn't get the words out. They couldn't get the Chatasi, the Avisi, the Bashati out. Below Hayu Nishma Hadibur, you couldn't hear any utterance coming from their lips. Lefichach, therefore, David HaMelech, when he recalls their tshuva, Nemra Zos Halashon B'dibur Believe. He says that their tshuva was a hear her believe. Because it was a believe nishbar. It was a broken heart. And when the heart was broken, they turned to sing Shira to Hashem. Ki eino nishma ad sheyetze v'yechtoch sefasayim. It was not heard ad sheyetze v'yechtoch sefasayim, until they got out, according to the opinion, they got out, and their lips were finally opened up, and they were able to talk about what happened to them. V'halev hamekave hadvarim k'mei makor hamayim. And the heart spilled out the tshuva like a spring. And I thought, this is beautiful. This is David HaMelech, because he understands what a chatasi is. If you're so brokenhearted that you can't speak, that's a chatasi. Chatasi, believe it's chatasi. But the question is, why are you brokenhearted? Are you broken-spirited because you feel bad simply about what you did and the effect it'll have on others? That's terrible. Are you bad because you were upset you did an avera? That's terrible. But are you upset because of the pure connected created between you and Hashem? That's the best kind of tshuva. And that's exactly what it Rashi means as hear her believe, Rachash believe. They were broken-hearted. Yes, they didn't deserve to come out, but they were also broken-hearted. And therefore we invoke their name before Tekiyah Shofar when we don't have no words for our tshuva at Tekiyah Shofar. What do we invoke? The kol shofar, the voice of the shofar, the wordless tefillah. Rachash belibi, a murmuring like the kol shofar murmurs and it stutters and nothing comes out. But that's the tshuva of Rosh Hashanah, if there is tshuva on Rosh Hashanah. And there's a lot more to say about this, but I just want to end with one last point, one half point and one more point. And that's why it says, go back to our original question, that's why it's always called Lamnitseach Livnei Korach, Shir Mizmor Livnei Korach. Because even a Korach can be forgiven through the tshuva of his sons. As the Gemara tells us, a child can bring back his parents. Right? The Pasuk in Tanakh tells us that parents will do tshuva through their children. That even if you're a Korach, if your children do tshuva, believe nishbar, as the Rambam tells us in the last source, it says even if a person at the very last moment was about to be eradicated from the world, ein davar omeid mipnei tshuva, nothing stands in the way of tshuva, says the Rambam in the last source. Nothing, even if you're Korach himself. And this is why the Ramban and others say that we want to mention Korach explicitly, mishpachas haKorachi. Because they were Korach's sons. Did you hear that? They were Korach's sons. And even he gets to be mentioned in Tanakh because his children did a proper tshuva. And it's brought down and it's well known that the reason why we say Lam Neseach, Lam Nei Korach, Dafka, if you look at it, it talks about the Kol Shofar there, but the word Elokim is mentioned 7 times in that kapitel Tehillim. And we say the kapitel 7 times. And 7 times 7 is 49. And we all know the significance of the number 49. Memtes. It's the last level. It's the Shara Gehenim. It's the Makom Nitzbaser Begehenim. It's the point when you're about to go into Gehenim. And we invoke Hashem's name, Elokim, 49 times. Hashem, even if I'm at the 49th level, even if it's Mamish Pischa Ha'aretz Espiyah and the land has opened up its mouth and I'm about to be swallowed up by the earth, I say your name 49 times. I understand I'm at the depth of my depth. And the only thing I can say, says the kapitel, is you say Elokim 49 times. You don't have to say Tshuva. You don't say Chatasi. You don't say Avisi. You say the name of God Himself. Because ultimately you understand the reason we do Tshuva is because something is sorely missing. And that's our connection with the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And that's what we ask for at the moment when we're our most brokenhearted. And we want Hashem to forgive us the most. Okay. The Mamla ways, I didn't read it, but just the beautiful Mamla ways on that kapitel about the value of roses versus the value of precious stones. But you could do that in your own time. Okay. Everyone have a Gemara Chasima Tova and a good